alaikum, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about one of the most polarizing issues that we have today, and for a reason that I don't quite understand. After doing extensive research on this, and reading Ron Paul's book called Liberty Defined, he talks about how we can't be liberated until or at least most Americans understand this issue. This issue is causing the deaths of 625,000 babies every year. Why? Why? Let's see. Okay, so what is abortion? That's a question that a lot of people see. There are many ways to answer it, but in the perfectly logical sense, then here's an excerpt from Liberty Defined by Ron Paul. He says, on one occasion in the 1960s when abortion was still illegal, I witnessed while visiting a surgical suite as an OBGYN resident the abortion of a fetus that weighed approximately 2 pounds. It was placed in a bucket, crying and struggling to breathe, and the medical personnel pretended not to notice. Soon the crying stopped. This harrowing event forced me to think more seriously about this important issue. He continues, that same day in the OB suite, an early delivery occurred and the infant born was only slightly larger than the one that was just aborted. But in this room, everybody did everything conceivable to save this child's life. My conclusion that day was that we were overstepping the bounds of morality by picking and choosing who should live and who should die. These were human lives. There was no consistent moral basis to the value of life under these circumstances. He continues in the next paragraph and says, I've never understood how an act of violence killing a human being, albeit a small one in a special place, is portrayed as a precious right. Essentially what he says abortion is it's killing a baby, number one, but there's a greater thing other than just, okay, well, you killed a baby. It's killing a baby for reasons that you think are justifiable. Okay, that's what abortion is. It's seeing, okay, well, my life was all set, and then I went to this party, and then, I got drunk, I got a bit loose, and then, I got pregnant, and, well, I'm just not, everything's so set right now. So you think it's justifiable to kill someone like that. Okay, to kill the baby inside of your womb. Another thing he mentions here is that it's the thing of picking and choosing who should live and who should die. That's what abortion is. Abortion is not necessarily evil in every circumstance. There are circumstances where you abort to preserve the mother's life because that's the only way you can preserve it, and in that case, it is morally justifiable. But most of the time, it's just picking and choosing who should live and who should die based on very, you could say, unimportant factors, like economics. When we're talking about abortion, we have to understand that the federal government has gotten itself entwined with this. So, abortion actually got highlighted in the 1950s to 60s when the feminist movement started. We'll talk more about that later. For now, let's understand what exactly happened in Roe v. Wade and the constitutional basis. It says, the 1973 Supreme Court case Roe v. Wade established that the United States Constitution protects a person's right to privacy, which includes the right to an abortion. So essentially, it's tied in the right to privacy, and abortion is within a lady's stomach. So they're like, that's kind of like, invading someone's privacy if you start telling them what to do. The court's decision was based on the 9th and 14th Amendments, which protect the right to privacy. Over here to the side, you can see the exact text of the 9th Amendment. It says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. The 9th Amendment to the United States Constitution states that all rights listed in the Constitution do not deny or disparage other rights that are retained by the people. Essentially, the Constitution is saying, we've listed some of the rights of our citizens, but it's not limited to what we've written. There are some that we haven't thought of yet. There are some that, we can't just go ahead and write every single right that a human being has in the Constitution. There are too many. The ones that we've written are just kind of what you would think of highlights. Okay, so they haven't explicitly written the right to privacy. But here they're saying, well, we didn't write all of the stuff in there. That would be a lot. And so we move on to the 14th Amendment. Specifically, the Due Process Clause. This was the clause heavily used in Roe v. Wade. It says the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states that no state can take away a person's life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And over here, under here, where they say a bunch of cases that used this Due Process Clause, you see Roe v. Wade. And the first thing that a regular person sees when they think of abortion and using the Due Process Clause is actually not what it was used for. Think about it. Here, they had to kind of crisscross, where they went to the 14th Amendment under liberty, and liberty includes the right to privacy under the 9th Amendment. So they were like, okay, because the Constitution has said we have liberty, then, privacy is part of our liberty. But something that's very apparent is it says the Constitution states that no state can take away a person's life. Abortion is literally aborting a life. There's no debate on that. That's something that both sides acknowledge. It's just that one side focuses on the liberty value aspect of it, and the other side, which would be the pro-life side, focuses on this part. Let's see what happened when Roe v. Wade got overturned. Here is constitution.congress.gov explaining what exactly happened when Roe v. Wade was overturned. It says the Roe Court ruled that states may not categorically prescribe abortions by making their performance a crime. The constitutional basis for the decision rested upon the conclusion that the right to privacy embraces a woman's decision to carry a pregnancy to term. With regard to the scope of that privacy right, the court stated that it includes only personal rights that can be deemed fundamental or implicit in the concept of ordered liberty, and bears some extension to activities related to marriage, procreation, contraception, family relationships, child rearing, and education. This is explaining what we just talked about in the Roe court. Then it says, with respect to protecting the right to an abortion against state interference, the court held that because of the right to privacy, which is a fundamental right, only a compelling state interest could justify its limitation by a state. Here, according to Oyes, is the conclusion. The Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood of Southeastern PA versus Casey are overruled. Justice Samuel Alito authored the majority opinion of the court. He says the Constitution does not mention abortion. The right is neither deeply rooted in the nation's history nor an essential component of ordered liberty. Essentially, what this says is actually that whole thing that the Roe court said before of how, being able to kill the child within your stomach is a right to liberty, of your liberty. He said, that's actually not true. And that makes sense. It's not mentioned in the Constitution. And here I'm going to take an excerpt out of Liberty Defined. This is an excerpt from Liberty Defined by Dr. Ron Paul. Here, this book was actually written in 2013, so this would be his prediction that would become 100% true. It said, "It is now widely accepted that there's a constitutional right to abort a human fetus." This was before Roe v. Wade was overturned. He says, "Of course, the Constitution says nothing about abortion, murder, manslaughter, or any other acts of violence. There are only 4 crimes listed in the Constitution: counterfeiting, piracy, treason, and slavery. Criminal and civil laws were deliberately left to the states. It's a giant leap for the federal courts to declare abortion a constitutional right and overrule all state laws regulating the procedure." So essentially what he says back in 2013 is that there is no constitutional right. Like, he went ahead and looked at the Constitution and said, listen, it doesn't talk about these more common civil crimes that happen. And now we've seen in Dobbs v. Jackson, the court case that overturned Roe v. Wade, there actually was none. He was right. There was no constitutional right to abort a human fetus. That was something that wasn't, the Constitution didn't talk about it. It didn't go for it, didn't go against it. It just said what it said in that due process clause of we have a right to life, liberty, and property. This is an excerpt from Liberty Defined by Dr. Ron Paul. Here, this book was actually written in 2013, so this would be his prediction that would become 100% true. It said, "It is now widely accepted that there's a constitutional right to abort a human fetus." This was before Roe v. Wade was overturned. He says, "Of course, the Constitution says nothing about abortion, murder, manslaughter, or any other acts of violence. There are only 4 crimes listed in the Constitution: counterfeiting, piracy, treason, and slavery. Criminal and civil laws were deliberately left to the states. It's a giant leap for the federal courts to declare abortion a constitutional right and overrule all state laws regulating the procedure." So essentially what he says back in 2013 is that there is no constitutional right. Like, he went ahead and looked at the Constitution and said, listen, it doesn't talk about these more common civil crimes that happen. And now we've seen in Dobbs v. Jackson, the court case that overturned Roe v. Wade, there actually was none. He was right. There was no constitutional right to abort a human fetus. That was something that wasn't, the Constitution didn't talk about it. It didn't go for, it didn't go against it. It just said what it said in that due process clause of we have a right to life, liberty, and property. So, how did this culture of abortions being allowed, of killing the baby in your stomach for reasons most of the time that you think are justifiable, when really it's not really worth a life? So let's take a look from feminist.com. So this is straight from the horse's mouth to see how this stuff actually, like, how could this have become something that people regarded as a precious right? They say abortion became a crime and a sin for several reasons. A trend of humanitarian reform in the mid-19th century broadened liberal support for criminalization, because at the time abortion was a dangerous procedure done with crude methods, few antiseptics, and high mortality rates. But this alone cannot explain the attack on abortion. For instance, other risky surgical techniques were considered necessary for people's health and welfare, and were not prohibited. Protecting women from the dangers of abortion was actually meant to control them and restrict them to their traditional childbearing role. Anti-abortion legislation was part of an anti-feminist backlash to the growing movements for suffrage, voluntary motherhood, and other women's rights in the 19th century. And they give a reference for more on that. It says, at the same time, male doctors were tightening their control over the medical profession. Doctors considered midwives who attended births and performed abortions as part of their regular practice a threat to their own economic and social power. So here, they very unjournalistically go ahead and don't even mention the biggest reason why the pro-life side opposes abortion, and that is because it's a crime and a sin. You're killing a baby for reasons. Like, no one's allowed to kill you, and I'm talking to you as the viewer. No one is allowed to kill you because of economics, because of all the reasons why people abort, right? Except for, of course, the exceptions to abortion, the lawful exceptions to abortion, like, it's going to almost certainly damage the mother's health if she continues with this. And the reason why, you might say, well, okay, aren't you picking and choosing? You're picking the mother's life over the baby's life? No, that's not the case, because one is superior. The mother is already established on this earth, and she has connections that will be severed if she dies. For example, if she may have other children that are dependent on her. For example, she may have a husband who depends on her for, the feminine role that she plays in his life. You have, she's part of, a job, a school. There are already connections established. And also, the fact that if the mother dies, almost certainly the baby won't have a positive experience of life. So that's not the case. But they don't even mention that here, because that's just the clearest way to look at the pro-choice side. They don't want to focus on that. They don't support looking into what abortion actually is, and I'll bring evidence for that later. But they essentially say, guys, can we just quickly do this? It's kind of one of those quick jobs that they say, guys, don't think too much about this. They say, they were protecting women from the dangers of abortion. And they mentioned, yeah, okay, it actually made sense to protect them, but they said because they wouldn't protect them from other surgeries that were very, and medical procedures that were, that had high mortality rates, then they said, okay, well, men were just trying to be macho and say, no, you're gonna have to stick to your traditional childbearing rule. But this is also invalid because abortion, it was accessible, and is accessible, to people who suffer from rape cases, etc. Where if you were raped, it's literally not your fault that you got pregnant. Okay, so essentially, this thing of, restrict them to their childbearing rule. If somebody forced you to do the act and conceive a baby with them, then that would count as rape. So no one was restricting them to their traditional childbearing rule except for themselves. Like, if you go out and you party and you have all this, supposed fun, that was you. You went ahead and had the baby. You are the reason why the baby was conceived. It wasn't anyone else. It wasn't these male doctors that they talk about. And another thing, even if this was the case, which I don't believe it isn't, they didn't put any evidence for this, which was kind of funny because it's such a new revelation that they got, that I haven't really heard before. But anyways, if you are trying to tighten your control over the medical profession by saving lives, then I would say that's kind of a contest for good, and yes, it's going to hurt whichever side loses, but it's like, I don't know. They're trying to tighten their control by what? Not by any bad methods, by just going ahead and saying, no, killing babies shouldn't be allowed. So that's what I understood from it. Another thing that I wanted to mention is over here. Where is it? Here is the opinion of the court. It's from supremecourt.gov, from Dobbs v. Jackson, which is the thing that the court case that overturned Roe v. Wade. And I believe this was Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice who wrote this concurrent opinion. He mentions a very great example or analogy. He says, Henry D. Bracton's 13th century treatise explains that if a person has struck a pregnant woman or has given her poison whereby he has caused abortion, if the fetus be already formed and animated, and particularly if it be animated, he commits homicide. So yes, he used a lot of fancy language over there, but let me simplify it for you. Back to the idea of where abortion is literally just picking and choosing who lives and who dies. Here, Henry de Bracton says, listen, if a pregnant lady wants her child, okay, she wants her child, but let's say some evil murderer guy comes and, I don't know, physically assaults her stomach, killing the baby, or gives her a poison which kills the baby, anything that may abort the baby, it would be as if he committed a homicide. So what's the difference between abortion and this? In one, you're consenting someone to kill your child. In the other, you're saying, no, I want to keep the child. So it's literally, this thing is actually just giving females the power to pick whether babies that are not actually causing them harm are going to live or die. And that puts a very terrible digression on the right that to life, liberty, and due process. Where let me pull in another excerpt from Liberty Defined. Just a second. Here, Ron Paul mentions the fact is that the fetus has legal rights. So that same due process clause that the feminists tried to use in making abortion legal, it's very clearly applicable here, without going through any twists or turns. It says, the fact that the fetus has legal rights, inheritance, a right to not be injured or aborted by unwise medical treatment, violence, or accidents. Ignoring these rights is arbitrary and places relative rights on a small living human being. So essentially, what Ron Paul is saying is literally just because it's a small human being that can't argue with you, that can't debate you, then you're going to say, okay, well, they're going to have relative rights. They're going to have just, they're going to have kind of these sub rights, these inferior rights. Okay, he says, um, scientifically, there's no debate over whether the fetus is alive or human. If not killed, it matures into an adult human being, God willing. It is that simple. So the timeline of when we consider a human fetus is arbitrary after conception in my mind. And another doctor, which I'll talk about later, says that actually it's not a scientific debate at all of whether the fetus is alive or not. No, it is alive. She said zygote, fetus. All these words are just to describe which stage of life a person is. So imagine saying that adults are human, but kids, they're like subhuman, right? So they don't have a right to life and stuff. And parents, imagine that. Imagine if 3-year-olds were um, in the same boat as the 3 year younger than them fetuses, and imagine if parents could just say, yeah, for reasons like finances, economics, etc., we're just gonna have to kill our 3-year-old. That would be absurd. That would be, as he says here at the top, if a state were to legalize infanticide, it could be charged with not maintaining a republican form of government, which is required by the Constitution. So essentially, you're picking and choosing who gets to live and who gets to die, and because these little babies in the female stomachs can't talk, can't debate, etc., can't argue, then you're saying, well, let's just keep this one under the table. Let's just do it. And we'll say that, it's a right. It's a female right. You're kind of like, get out of our business kind of thing. Like, imagine that. Imagine if you went on the road and you saw a man bludgeoning a lady, and you go and you say, what are you doing? And they say, get out of my business. This is my right to privacy. Or like, that's not a bit. Let me give you a better example. Let's say he was bludgeoning a lady in the car, but you could see that the car light was on and what's going on. So you knock at the door and say, hey, what are you doing? Let's say you're a police officer, so it's not like some idiotic thing to go up and stand up to that. And then he says, get out of my business. This is my car. Stop invading my privacy. You would probably say, sir, I'm sorry. Even though it's in your car, you don't have the right to take away someone's life. So here's what Ron Paul is saying, which I think is super sensible. Okay, we're gonna go one by one. This is by ANSIRH, funded by the University of California, San Francisco. It's called The Harms of Denying a Woman a Wanted Abortion. Findings from the Turnaway Study. They give different, they kind of list with bullet points the harms of denying a woman a wanted abortion. Let's just go through each one. It says, number 1, denying a woman an abortion creates economic hardship and insecurity which lasts for years. So it says, women who were turned away and went on to give birth experienced an increase in household poverty lasting at least 4 years relative to those who received an abortion. Years after an abortion denial, women are more likely to not have enough money to cover basic living expenses like food, housing, and transportation. Being denied an abortion lowered a woman's credit score, increased a woman's amount of debt, and increased the number of their negative public financial records, such as bankruptcies and evictions. Okay, how do you even start? So, they mention here, it lowers a woman's credit score, and it increases a woman's amount of debt, and all these things that are very obvious. If you're gonna have a child unexpectedly because you didn't plan it and you were irresponsible with your close private life, then because of your irresponsible behavior, then yes, you're gonna end up getting pregnant, and yes, children take money. That's not something that anyone's denying. We're just saying, or rather the pro-life side is saying, that it's not fair that you kill a child just because they're going to take money. A child that you brought into this life. Again, we have to mention, nobody's making the case that if you get raped, you shouldn't have access to an abortion. No, there should be an exception for that. Although the moral thing still stands of, Like, why would you punish it? But you could resolve that. Here, you can't resolve it. You're literally, you imagine a scale, and on one you're putting a baby's life, and on another you're putting finances. They didn't say these people died from it, so you're literally exchanging your baby's life for something that won't kill you. Okay? I think that's a perfect scale to look at. Will it kill you? Because then, a life for a life. Okay, so if I have this baby, then they're guaranteeing that I'm going to bleed to death according to my medical records, etc. So you have an abortion. Here, it's just saying it's going to lower your credit score. Imagine if your parents thought like that and said, wow, my credit score is going to be lowered if I get this baby. And imagine they killed you because of that. Like, what an absurd reason to kill someone. Another thing that I wanted to mention is, I didn't actually know this. It said women who were turned away, blah, 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 had an increase in household poverty lasting at least 4 years relative to those who received an abortion. They're not even saying that the people who didn't get an abortion, who got an abortion, were really well off. They're just saying they got 4 years less. So you're not even saying it's poverty versus the child's life. No, it's poverty for 4 more years versus a child's life who's gonna live beyond 4 years. So it's very, very, it's not even tough reasoning. It's just, as I mentioned at the beginning, the only way you could justify having abortions for financial reasons is not thinking about it. Okay. Another thing I would like to mention is Americans have, the general American has barely any budgeting experience. We took in class, we took a class, or rather a lesson focused on budgeting. And I learned there, I'm a very different person. I was raised in a house where money is something that you don't waste because God says he doesn't like the wasteful. Okay, if you're given money, you're supposed to use it properly. And so I found this article called "How Much Do Americans Spend on Christmas?" This is just one holiday, you guys. I'm not even talking about Valentine's Day, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and all the other St. Patrick's Day. I mean, there's so many holidays that you can just splurge on. Look at this. It says Americans spend approximately $1,000 on Christmas each year. Okay, take that in. $1,000 were given to you. Okay, just pretend there was just this generous, rich cat that came to you with a letter in its mouth, and when you opened the envelope, then it had $1,000. And you just poofed it all on Christmas. Okay? Let's see, it says 96% of Americans buy gifts for their families. Okay. Gifts for families, friends, and coworkers, around $648 on gifts for friends, family, and coworkers. Do you know what you're supposed to do if you're poor? You're supposed to do something called deal shopping, where you look at things from before, like I'm talking about 3 months before Christmas. You look at whatever you want to buy, and you find the cheapest version of it on the internet. It's very brutally hard, okay? It's not easy to do deal shopping. But that's what you do. That's what you do when you have a tough financial situation, okay? They're ready to give coworkers, friends, family I understand, and friends, okay? Up to, I don't know, if I have to estimate, maybe at least half of it. So $300 worth of gifts. You're not obliged to do that. I understand that you want to do that. But if you want to do that and not have to feel so pressured by finances to kill the baby inside of your stomach that is half you, then you do deal shopping. Like, oh my gosh, almost $1,000 billion were spent in America in 2022. Like, what is this? Oh, and that's just Christmas. That's just Christmas. The poverty rate in America is 11.1%, around. Okay, right now it's 2024. That was 2023. 96% of Americans buy gifts for their families. Oh my gosh. This is just so absurd. And it says the Northeast outspends the South by around $100 per person each year. The Northeast is going to be where more abortions happen because they're less conservative and more democratic, not Republican, kind of like that, in the North. So it's like the people that like abortions more spend more on holiday purchases, and they could have been spending this money to live a less poverty-ridden life. I wanted to make an analogy, so I actually used Alexa. I don't usually use Alexa for serious things because she's a bozo, but she actually gave some pretty good insight. Take a listen. Alexa, does it reduce your wealth if you buy a car?
From Fool.com. Your net worth trends to increase over time as you acquire assets and reduce liabilities.
You know, I asked her that because I thought she was going to say, yeah, it does reduce your wealth. But then she gave me this new insight that I hadn't thought of before. She gave me something to ponder on. She said, people's wealth tend to increase when they reduce liabilities and increase assets. Wow. Think about it this way. A child is just like a car. Yes, when you give birth to it, it takes a big down payment. Maintenance also takes a lot of money. You have to fill cars with gas just the way you have to fill babies with food and love. And your children might die. You don't know what's going to happen, when's going to happen. You know, your car might crash. You might total it by mistake. Someone else might drive into it. Same thing with a child. Like when COVID came, a lot of children died. So yeah, you might not even get to see it till fruition. But think about the people whose cars didn't crash. The people who were careful with their cars, careful with their assets. They got to use their cars for a very, very long time. They got to enjoy their cars. They were spared so much. If you properly raise your kids and you devote the time, you make the lifestyle change, and you be a mother by choice, you're actually going to have a child that is not a liability, but that is an asset. A child who, when you're feeling just like you can't take it anymore, the kitchen's a mess, you don't want to clean it, which happens more often than not, you're like, what am I gonna do? And you enter your kitchen, and your little angel that you never thought would do such a big task for you when it was a baby went ahead and cleaned your kitchen for you. And they do this over and over again. And, you know, we do it to our mom, okay? I know that because my mom properly raised us, thank God. So, your child is a car. Only difference is it's given by God. Next point says women turned away from getting an abortion are more likely to stay in contact with a violent partner. They're also more likely to raise the resulting child alone. I went to their sources. I did you could say mini investigation on this, and the way they're so insincere about this, the way they just turned it around, I'm gonna make a whole entire video about this one. It'll be in the playlist right after this video, in the Liberty Defined podcast series. So I'm not gonna talk about that right now. Essentially, it's like, I don't know, if 30% of all women are more likely to stay in contact with a violent partner, and 40% of ladies have an abortion, then they go, oh yeah, 75% of women are more likely to stay in contact with a violent partner. They're trying to connect it to abortion when it's not actually connected to abortion. It's more connected to alcohol and the intake of drinks than that. Anyways, it says the financial well-being and development of children is negatively impacted when their mothers are denied abortion. Okay, this is a very, very big thing. So the financial well-being, we already talked about that, but it's the development of the children. And here it says carrying an unwanted pregnancy to term is associated with poor maternal bonding, such as resenting the baby or feeling trapped. with the child born after abortion denial compared to the next child to a woman who received an abortion. So, number one, this is obvious where if you have an abortion, if you killed the baby in your stomach and you get another child, you're obviously going to value them more because you're going to feel guilty that you killed the last one. So, I'm just going to scrap that idea. Like, this is true. They just stated the obvious. But as for this, you're advocating for abortion because you're like, the moms ain't gonna like their babies if they're denied an abortion. That's like so obvious. And it is so easy to fix. You have to raise your women in a way that they maximize on their empathy. This is what feminism did. Like, I'm not one of those people that just says, oh yeah, men need to be, our heroes. No, I'm not. Like, you could say I'm anti-feminist, but it's only because of things like this, where they're ready to kill children, their own children, for reasons, like rivaling men. Like, you don't do that, okay? You don't do that. And so, they're literally saying, instead of just educating and establishing a new culture of empathizing, of females going back and tapping into their soft skills, I'm gonna actually pull up something that I saw in my history book, just a second. So, this was a poem written by Louisa Sheves McCord, and she received an excellent education. Okay, this is according to a history book that I'm taking in college right now. It's not something that's leaning towards anyone, it's just a primary source, okay? And just imagine how a feminist would react to this. This is from an educated woman. It's from a 1800s lady who was writing to the Southern women at the time who had just started to advocate for their suffrage, which means voting rights. They were starting to advocate for, easier jobs and pay, whatever, because at that time cotton mills had started. And she says, "Sweet sister, stoop not thou to be a man." I mean, this is like such sense. Like, girls be girls and guys be girls, but we have all this mixing where females are trying to rival men in things that they weren't created for. I mean, like, for example, take a guy, okay, a random guy, and an average woman. The guy's gonna be stronger. Like, why are we trying to be stronger than the guy physically when we can be stronger in other things? For example, if you leave a child with a newborn with an average woman and a newborn with an average guy, the newborn will be obviously more cared for with the female. So we have our strengths, they have our strengths. Just to oppose this, you're ready to kill children because you're like, yeah, we don't want to be traditional. We want to break the tradition. And so, I find it quite sad that this is a reality. It is a reality. You have cases where Americans have dumped their newborns in mop buckets to die because they're like, well, we never wanted the baby. And of course the thing would be to put them into adoption, which is also very treacherous. And the adoption process, if you watch the movie Luck, you'll see. You literally are informed, yes, the couple came to see you and they didn't like you, and so they're not adopting you. Actually, it's a culture. And Ron Paul talks about this too. He says something very, the best way I can describe it is supreme. He mentions that you can try to overturn Roe v. Wade, and you have to keep in mind, this is before Roe v. Wade was overturned. And he was actually super right. He got this entirely right, actually. So, he said, "The difference or lack thereof between a baby 1 minute after birth and 1 minute before needs to be quantified. The Congress or the courts are incapable of doing this. This is a profound issue to be determined by society itself based on the moral value it espouses." So, essentially, he says, so if we are ever to have fewer abortions, society must change again. The law will not accomplish that. You can't force ladies to care for their babies. You have to do what perhaps feminists would call indoctrination, or restraining females into their traditional rules. It's essentially empowering females to capitalize on what they were created to do. People are starting to get too creative, saying that, like, you have female boxing nowadays. It's like, we weren't meant to do that. I mean, you can do that, but you weren't meant to do that. The only thing is, nowadays, it's gone to the level where we're ready to kill our children just to keep this culture, this negative culture, this culture of going ahead. And for example, here it says she's very, very she's very sincere in her poem. She's not making it look like a cakewalk. She says, "But holy still they are. The lowliest tasks are sanctified and nobly acting them." And my mom always says, my mom is a professional housewife. She could have gotten, honestly, probably 200K a year in a job, but she actually went ahead and didn't take a job because she said, I want to do those tasks. I want to clean the kitchen sink for my family. I want to do it for my family. I want to do it because God gave me a family, and that's how I thank him for all the love and the intangible rewards that I get for being a mother. So she gives an example and says, if I'm a doctor and my husband's also a doctor and we both come back from work at 6 p.m., what makes me want to go and do the lowly task of cleaning the kitchen sink? Nothing. Why should she? Okay? And that causes strife. And that causes children, to look like a burden. Like, okay, we're both going to the job. When we come back home, why should I be the one who soothes the child when they're crying? It kind of messes up our moral sense. It literally messes us up. That's the only way to describe it. Where at this point we don't know what to defy, and we're ready to defy the most obvious of rights: the right to life, the right to give your child a life if you've conceived them. So yeah, that was just my take on this. Let's see. Then it says giving birth is connected to more health problems than having an abortion. It says women who were denied an abortion and gave birth reported more life-threatening complications like eclampsia and postpartum hemorrhage compared to those who received wanted abortions. So, okay, this is also something that I find pretty absurd. These are medical issues that need, I guess, more research done, treatments to be found, and after that, the government needs to step in and provide subsidies for these treatments, and that's the way to go. And it's not like our government's too poor to do it, because the pro-abortion people are going to say abortions take a lot of money. And so they're going to say, yeah, our females, they need subsidies to do abortions. How about you use that money towards actually allowing the child to be born and the mother being safer postpartum? I just see like all of their points. This one we haven't discussed yet. I'm gonna make a whole. Oh my gosh, this one drove me nuts. How they construed the facts in such an insincere way. But all these points, they are real. Okay, they are real. The problem is they're all solvable, and the solution that feminists have brought of just killing a child, that's something you can't undo. You can undo poverty, okay? You can work to prevent, mothers not loving their kids by reestablishing a culture that feminists have the reach to do. You can go ahead and find cures. You can research this. Like, scientists nowadays can do the craziest things on Earth. They're trying to go to space, and you're telling me they can't figure out how to prevent eclampsia and postpartum hemorrhage. And here it says no women died from abortion. That's wrong. Let's take a look at that. Women died from abortion. It's not significant, but it's real. This is according to the NIH. During 1998 to 2010, there were 108 deaths from abortion-related causes. So like they literally lied. Like how could you do that? That's just so blatant. Yeah, see, feminists have to go through a lot of fake stuff to get you to actually buy their falsehood that it's your right to decide whether your child lives or not. I mean, it's not surprising that you have to it's not surprising that you have to lie to someone to get them to think that you can either choose to let someone live or die. Anyways, that's it for today. I'm gonna have 2 follow-up episodes, a part 2 and part 3. Part 2 is going to be about this. Alexa, stop. About this, and then we're gonna look at a video about abortion. It's gonna be a scientific video that I think you need to watch if you're going to do an abortion. Thank you guys. Have a nice day.